Okay, then financial projections. You should be doing more detailed financial projections for the executive summary. You really just kind of need something that, a small table and a few explanatory sentences covering break-even analysis and positive cash flow. But what I've got here is you want an overview of the revenue and profits. You want to probably have at least 5-year pro forma projections. So, for 2009, out 5 years. At a minimum, you want to have revenue, net profit. Headcount's probably not necessary. Cumulative customers would be useful. Annual number of units, if you're selling products. These kinds of things. Anything that would help the reader understand, how realistic your numbers are. I actually pulled this out of a real executive summary, showing that. Showing this company put this six-year pro forma here. You can, just from this small amount of information, you can pull out some pretty good, make some pretty good deductions. This company in 6 years is planning to get to $44.5 million in revenue, right? So right off the bat, this is it's a pretty decent sized opportunity. It's not huge. But it's decent sized. You may be able to get some VCs interested in it, but not necessarily. Yeah, your question?
So if you're doing a medical startup and you have that 10-year FDA process, would you want to see the financials during that regulatory period or once you start bringing in revenue?
That's a good question. I think I would probably want to see them out until you start getting 5 years of revenue. And that means that while you're in the regulatory period, obviously there's not going to be any revenue, but I'd want to get an understanding for how much you're going to be spending, right? So I think that part would be important. But I also need the revenue to figure out how big the opportunity is as well. Okay, and then the break-even analysis here is to figure out when do total sales equal total costs. And you can figure that out from the table that's up here, but I would want you guys to call it out in the text of the executive summary, not just to throw a table up there, but to say, in this case, we're looking at revenue equaling total costs pretty early on, probably by the 3rd year, right? So, actually, even earlier than that, 2nd year. So, but if you can call it out and say, we will have break even within 2 years or 3 years. Positive cash flow. Cash flow is not the same as profit. You should understand the difference between income statements and cash flow statements. For the executive summary, it's not important to get down into the nitty-gritty details, but when do you start getting positive cash flow? When is your cash input greater than your cash output? Okay. And for this case, unless you're in a business where accounts receivable and accounts payable are really long, it's going to be pretty similar to what your profit and income statement will look like. Okay, any questions on the financial projections?
It's really simple in terms of projections, right? It's not, you're not putting down your debt obligations or things that you might need to pay back, none of that.
No, not in the financial projections at this point for the executive summary. When you put together your business plan, we'll want to have more detail and have full integrated income financial statements. But here, I think that something like this would be enough. And then, sort of getting to your question too, is what your investment needs are. So, how much money are you going to need to execute on your plan? Okay. And then this should be drawing on your financial projections. You should be able to figure out how much of an investment you need in order to get in order to follow the plan that you've outlined in your executive summary. Okay. You want to be able to identify, if you have milestones. Well, I need $250,000 to finish clinical trials. Then I need another $250,000 to hire some salespeople, or I need $1 million. You want to be able to lay out those different milestones if you're at the stage where you can identify them. And here's also an opportunity to discuss the milestones you've already achieved. If you've already put some money into the company, if you've received some government grants, SBIR funding, or whatever. to get your idea started. If you discuss those milestones, it makes your company seem all that more credible, and your executive summary will look better. So discuss the milestones you've already achieved as well, technical or financial. Okay. Now, as a recap, just some of the do's and don'ts. Remember that throughout the components of the executive summary that I discussed, you want to be thinking about this risk versus return criteria. So anytime you can address something that the reader may think is risky, you want to address that and explain how you're going to mitigate that risk and what the potential return will be for anyone who's someone who gets involved with your company. Keep in mind who your audience is. Again, non-technical language, keeping it simple, but understand that these guys are savvy. They've probably read a bunch of business plans before, or worked on them before. So you don't have, you can assume that they're intelligent, but they may not be well schooled in your particular technology. Keep it simple and concise. Don't use jargon, right? I hate getting executive summaries where they assume I know what certain equipment does or what certain bacteria is or whatever. You need to try to explain things as simply as possible without jargon or acronyms. Use a top-down approach. Okay, so don't use a top-down approach without bottom-up support. So judges really hate seeing something like, we will secure 1% of the $10 billion market in 3 years. Okay, why 1%? Why not 10%? Why not 20%? Why not 50%? A lot of times we'll see these kinds of statements without any kind of justification for why 1% makes sense or why 10% makes sense, right? If you think that you can get 1% of a $10 billion market, explain how you got to that figure, right? So, maybe you say, well, we're going to hire 10 salespeople. Each of those salespeople can attack 100 companies a year, and we think that we can sell maybe to 70% of those. Blah 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 blah. Try to build a bottom-up approach to getting to that number, if that's really truly the number you think you can do. Don't overclaim. That was the question earlier. Whether or not you should say we are the best, we're the fastest, we're the cheapest. Well, only make those claims if you have some kind of justification for making those kind of claims. But of course, you should be confident about what you're doing as well. And then the last one is don't underestimate costs. Really think about how many people you're going to need to get something done. Try to look into how much it costs to do clinical trials or to do to do sales or whatever. Most of these executive summaries are always underestimating costs. So think about that carefully.